Well, we got an hour, so we ought to have some fun, and we ought to change this industry, huh? Seems like a good goal. I don't mean that in a negative way, like it needs change, but everything needs change, in my opinion. So I want to, my topic, I saw when I was invited by Ellen to do this keynote speech, what intrigued me, actually, was the topic of DAC, which was, really right-centered on this company where I am chairman, Orb Networks. And I said, that's great. I mean, that's a wonderful topic. It's perfect that they're thinking entertainment, games, multimedia, all these things that are so hot. And I'll come back and chat about why I think that's such an important topic. That's what got me intrigued. And then I went and actually looked at the program a bit, or the tentative program at that point, and I saw all kinds of, a couple of keynotes that were really interesting from a guy from ST and one from Texas Instruments, and a lot of the core data. Great wrestling of the issues around technology and what's going on in this business. Now, as Ellen said, I've been gone for 10 years, so I know diddly squat about what's going on in electronic design, automation, or design. So I can add no value whatsoever in any of those areas. So the rest of the conference, you're going to have more than enough, from what I can see from the conference agenda. You'll have more than enough value added here. So I have a slightly different take, which is maybe kind of a meta take on the industry and where things are. And that's why I have this title, iPod or Iridium. Which one are you going to be? That I can perhaps shed some light on, or at least have some discussion. To start it out, I'm going to go backwards in time and talk about how I got into marketing. Because as it was stated, I started out as a mathematician, a physicist, and kind of backed into the marketing kind of side of things. And the way it got started was actually at National Semiconductor. And I got to National Semiconductor in a bit of a circuitous route. I went there as a summer job. I'd started as a theoretical physicist in working on my PhD at Berkeley. And there weren't any jobs, weren't any research associates there, so I had to switch. I had to become an experimental physicist. I knew nothing about electronics. And the first lab I walk into, they've got banks of electronics. I went, oh my God, I'm dead. So it turned out, here was Silicon Valley down the street, and so I went down there and got a summer job that lasted 2.5 years in Silicon Valley at National Semiconductor. Went back to get my PhD, or to finish my PhD. That didn't happen. Along the way, I decided that didn't make any sense, so I just got another master's degree. And I had this idea for starting a company in energy conservation. This is in, I forget, late 70s, early 1980s. And then Ronald Reagan got elected. And I was a technical guy, but I was a smart enough marketing guy to know that was not good news for my energy conservation startup. So, as luck would have it, the phone rang just about then from a guy at National Semiconductor and said, hey, we're doing this thing in speech synthesis and recognition, and you know stuff about math and things like that, and we need someone to do work on the algorithm software. And I said, fine, that sounds interesting. And I ended up going down to interview, and I took this job. By the time I got there, actually, a new guy had taken over. A guy named Jim Solomon had taken over the group for speech synthesis and speech recognition, and I interviewed with him, and he seemed like a pretty nice guy. The job seemed interesting. I was excited about it, and I said I had one requirement. I want to manage a group. And remember, he looked at me and goes, okay, why? And you haven't managed anything in your life as far as I can tell. I said, that's true, but I want to. And I feel it's the thing I want to do, and you want something from me. You want my skills in software and algorithms and stuff like that, so we'll swap. You give me what I want, I'll give you what you want. So he did. He gave me this group. And so that's how I got started. Now, little did I know, and he did the logical thing. I would have done the same thing if it was him. He gave me there were 2 speech activities at the time, and he gave me the one that was kind of a dud. I was a guy who never managed anything, for God's sake. So he gives me the dud and says, have at it. And so, I'm excited. Why not? I own this thing, and we're going at it. And it was a product called, at the time, Digitalker was the name of the product. Probably very few people in this room old enough or have a car shitty enough that has still a Digitalker product in it. But it had the trademark was, the door is ajar. Except that was it sounds way too, it's more like a door. Anyway, so that was the product line, and it had done modestly well, and people were, this is the late 70s, early 80s, and people were just getting into this. And so we needed, we talked to the marketing guys and people, and we needed another generation of product that had to have some specs that were like, cheaper and better and, the normal marketing spec. And so I was all excited, and I needed to have a team, though, to do this. I said, Jim, I've never designed an integrated circuit. I need to have some guys to do it. And so Jim, one of the great things about Jim, he was absolutely superb at hiring and attracting phenomenal people. And so he hired this guy out of Berkeley, another Berkeley person who had just gotten his master's in electrical engineering, Joe Santos. And, he was really smart and a really good guy. And so actually, the other group, the good group, lusted after this guy. But he was kind of like me. He wanted to do his own thing. In the other group, he wouldn't have been the big cheese. In this group, he could be the big cheese because I'd let him design the whole chip. And so he joined me. And so we started down this path, and he was brilliant. And he worked so hard and so dedicated and so innovative. And we learned from other guys. There was a guy, Jake Burma, who actually saw earlier here, who was running the other group, and Ron Pasqualini, all these guys helped Joe, guide him along. And we were working on this phenomenal new chip. He took a whole different architectural approach than anybody had for this kind of a speech synthesis circuit. And we were pounding away at it. We got it. In those days, we didn't have tools anything close to what we did here. When we did our design rule checking, we got plots. And we would sit by hand for days, nights, weeks, going back and forth on it. And we produced this chip. It had one error the first time through, one mistake. We had to have that one respin, but then it worked perfectly. And it was on time, cheaper than, faster than, better than anybody had expected. It was an awesome chip because of this guy right here, Joe Santos. It was incredible. So now, in the meantime, I'd been out, talking to some customers about, so what's the story? How are we doing? How come we're not selling more of this stuff? And I'd had a few of these conversations, and I came to a couple of conclusions. There were two issues that we had. Number one, remember this is like 1978 and 80, 81, something like that. Two problems. Number one, most of our customers, they were scared of electronics to begin with. And then you talk about electronics that makes it speak. It's kind of it's an application. It's kind of a system product. And so we had to help these guys. You couldn't just throw a chip and a spec at them. They needed kind of a package deal. So that was one thing we needed. And the second thing was, when you were selling this product, you had to have, there was the speech chip, that's what we produced, but the bigger cost of the whole thing was memory. And you had to have ROM, where you actually stored the memory stored the speech for this stuff. So I put all this together. I went to Jim and I said, damn it, this isn't going to work the way it is. We need to go and we need to get these bastards that run this company to invest more so we can become more systems oriented and get a full chipset in here that's reasonably priced so we can kick the ass of the competition. That's what we got to do. Let's march in there and do it. He goes, Joe, great idea. Let's do it. Put together a presentation. Jim vetted it. We go in. Jim, myself, I think we had the marketing guy with us. We go to John Finch, who was the CEO of the semiconductor division. Kind of scary first time. I kind of met him once, right? I give him this presentation. He's listening, nodding the whole way through, seemed attentive. That was good. At the very end of it, he pushes back from the desk and he goes, Joe, he said, I got to hand it to you. That was probably the best presentation of any business or business unit that I've seen in at least a year. He said, that was great. He said, I have a clear picture exactly what the essence of this business is. And he said, it's clear to me we ought to kill it now. So I rotated back over to Jim, and we had this quick eye contact, and he was like, shut up, Joe. This is not the time for a big argument. So we walked out, stunned. I remember going back to the group, because they were anxiously awaiting. I had everybody pumped up. We're going to go win. And so we come back to the group, and there's Joe, and a couple of the design guys, and this, we had some algorithm people, and all these people in there sitting, waiting. So, and I said, well, do you want the good news or the bad news first? And then thinking through that, I went, I ain't going to let him choose, because I know. I said, let me give you the good news first, It was the most awesome presentation that's been given in a year. That's us. We did it. It was great. The bad news is they've chosen to kill the group. And Joe, some of you might, small section of the group here might know him. Joe is a hard guy. He's a tough guy. Emotionally tough and, rugged, and some people would say, he's, prickly, because he's really smart and he is aggressive. Joe started crying, sobbing, for real. And I was like, oh, shit. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, I messed up. I screwed up. You know, and what he was crying about, we talked later, is that he had spent 2 years of his life. He put everything, his heart, his soul, every ounce of him into this chip. And it was dead, gone, boom, obliterated. Those 2 years of everything he did was gone. It's like, oh. I said, look, I made a promise to myself. I will never let that happen again to any of my groups. Never is that going to happen to one of my engineering teams. Never again. Whatever it takes to figure out so some schmuck doesn't screw me like that, I am going to do it. Now, I didn't even know what the hell marketing was, but it somewhat had to do with that. I knew it. So I said, I got to take control of that going forward. And that's how I actually made my move into marketing. You know, and started down that path. Self-preservation of my teams. People who put their entire human spirit into developing a great product and then see it something like that snuffed. Now, the title of the talk is to do with Iridium and iPod. Now, my story about Digitalker and speech synthesis back in the early 80s, you can say, well, you know, it was, after all, National Semiconductor, and it wasn't really a very systems-oriented house and specialty, and you were a dumb schmuck running your first group, and blah, 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 blah. But the history and the landscape of technology is littered with these same stories, and I thought I'd pick one that is very visible and everybody should know, and since it's been a little bit of a time since this happened, I thought I'd refresh some of the details. This is the Iridium project that Motorola had put together a number of years ago. So first of all, Iridium, one of the interesting things about it that I actually hadn't known until I had to prepare for this talk. I knew a lot about it, but not that it actually had gotten conceived in 1985. It was a long, long time before it got rolling. The idea behind it, if you all remember, they were going to put up, at the time, and this is where the name came from, 77 low Earth orbit satellites, LEOs, and they were going to be up there, these 77, it was going to allow, because before all satellite communications came from stationary orbits. And that was great, except they were really expensive to put up there, number one. Number two, you had that nasty 2.5-second lag time, you know, like the thing, you know, those reporters in Iraq. Juan, is that a gun being pointed at your head? Could you repeat? So they didn't like that, you know, so this idea was you can't have it up there at 22,000 miles in the stationary orbit. You got to get them low so you don't have that lag time. It's cheaper to do it that way. And you can make smaller handsets, you know, more reasonably priced and lower powered handsets. So that was the idea behind it. It was a kind of an interesting idea. Now note, 77, atomic number of iridium, that was the original idea. In the end, it was actually 66 satellites, not 77. If you go up and look at the atomic number of 66, the element is dysprosium. Now, as it turns out, there's a lot of hidden meanings in life, and that's one. I guarantee you, dysprosium would not have been a great marketing name for this product. And when they decided to go from 77 to 66 was about when the whole thing went to hell in a handbasket, as we can see, and that should have been the first indicator of it. Their target market, by the way, at the time was high-level execs. Good thought. We're going to go to these high-level traveling executives. You know, should be a dynamite market. And just again to scale, because you know people sometimes go, "Well, how stupid could these people be?" And you'll see they weren't necessarily that stupid as they got into this. We'll come back to that in a second. So the technology development was done from 87 to 96. They announced it in 1990. In 1994, they got 18 high-level, very significant partners handing up money from all around the world to make this thing happen. They did the deployment 96 to 98. That's when the big bucks went down, right? And we'll see how much big bucks was in a moment. They did an IPO in 1997. In 1998, all the satellites were launched. Now, here is an awesome fact about it. In these kinds of satellites, you get a 10 to 15% failure rate standard. You don't think these guys were awesome. They didn't miss one of those 66 satellites. Every single one succeeded. No failures out of 66. Incredible execution on this. They launched the service November 1998, and it worked. And it worked great. Right? So that was it. And it wasn't like there was just a bunch of technical guys, we will build it, they will come. They had a $140 million aggressive advertising and marketing campaign to get it out there. That's how it started. $5 billion was invested in it. That's slightly higher than was invested in Digitalker, I want to point out. We didn't get quite that. By May of 1998, it had a market cap, Iridium, when it went public in 97, had a market cap of $10 billion. In the beginning of 1999, the market cap had come off a bit. It was still $6 billion. People were still recommending it. They had projected revenues by 2005 of $7 billion. It was a conservative estimate at that time of what they generate. And they filed for bankruptcy in August of 1999, one of the largest 20 bankruptcies at the time in the history of the United States in business. That's the story. So what happened? Well, first of all, let's look at the final product. The final Iridium product was this. It had a handset that cost $3,000, and when I say it's the size of a brick, that's not me being pejorative. That's what everybody said. Well, it's about the size of a brick. You know, that was not a very good way to start things off. The calls were $3 to $8 per minute, and there were some service limitations, a few. These phones, the brick-sized phones that cost $3,000 and $3 to $8 a minute, could not work inside buildings, inside moving cars. It was okay if you were stopped. Most cars, it would work inside a stopped car, or in urban areas, without a specialized small refrigerator-sized attachment to give you reception in urban areas. Even in open areas, you had to have correct phone alignment with this brick, and it didn't really offer data capabilities. That was the Iridium story. Now, the original concept, it was not, got to go back where it was. When this thing got started, there really wasn't a choice for high-end business travelers. They had spotted a marketplace when this thing got going, 85, 86, 87, even into the 90s. At that time, every single country had a different cellular system. So there was a mess out there, and they thought for a very targeted small group of people where communication is important, these high-level business execs, was great. It only required 400,000 users to hit break even, which, if you think about that, that's not a lot of users. You look at it, any kind of telecommunications to play today. It's nothing. So it wasn't a stupid idea at the beginning, but, and here was their own prediction at that time. Their prediction in 2002 was that there would be 12 million satellite phones and 100 million total cellular. And now we start to see where the thing started to fall apart, right, in that prediction. That was their 2002 prediction. So what went wrong? The bottom line is the world had changed. In a dramatic way, the world had changed for these guys. GSM got started and then was adopted. It was deployed in 1993. This is during that heavy development phase, 1987 up through 1996, that heavy development. GSM got deployed in 23 countries and 25 more said they were going to do it. Well, that's a major change in your business strategy and potentially what's going to happen. By the end of 1998, when they were launching, there were already 150 million GSM users, not total cellular users, but just GSM, this one standard that worked across all these countries. But these guys proceeded on in some ways you could say blindly, at least blind to some of the facts, and lost a huge amount of money. They also never addressed some of those issues that I was talking about. They'd been known for years, that those could be issues and problems, but they got ignored. They were enamored of their technology. And it was a miracle that they brought this whole thing together. Truly a miracle at that time to have built something of that sophistication and have it work like that. I could tell you for a long time, I know some of the stories of how they built this and how it all came together. It's incredible what they did. It's the Joe Santos story times 1,000, really, literally. So some of the lessons about it. Look, what makes things successful and not? It's not technology, right? It is not technology. It was elegant and beautiful and sophisticated and ingenious, and they have, for instance, 1,000 patents covering the work that they did during that period of time. It isn't commitment of resources. Holy crap, they had 2,000 engineers working on this at one point toward the end. Uh-oh, I went black. Hit that black button again. All right. And they spent $5 billion. That was pretty hefty. It's not execution. They were on budget, literally. How many projects of that size, $5 billion spanning almost 10 years, are on budget and almost exactly on time, a few months off? And a better than expected deployment. They didn't miss a single satellite. Unbelievable. Didn't lack the marketing. They spent $140 million there. And it wasn't a lack of passion. These people were passionate about what they did. I'll give you a flavor for it. Here's the general manager. He and his team said they saw it as a dawning of a new era of humanity, helping global interconnectedness. What a noble goal. We'll do marvelous things. By God, you will if you could interconnect the world that way. Raymond Leopold, the CTO, if you believe in God, enough said. He was passionate. These people were passionate about what they did. So what's the lesson? Technology, execution, passion, all of those things we talked about, they are necessary for greatness. They're necessary for greatness. But they are not sufficient. They are not sufficient for greatness. You have to understand your target marketplace. It is as important, equally important, balanced, actually completely balanced with all of that technology, execution, and passion on the engineering product side. You have got to understand your target market. And, as I say here, watch out, because they changed. That's what they missed. They could have killed that project. It was clearly, before they spent the billions, they hadn't even spent $1 billion yet. Before they spent their billions, GSM had been deployed. They didn't reset, they didn't recheck, they didn't go back to their assumptions. They just kept soldiering on out of their passion for this whole thing. And that was in the 90s. And the speeds have gotten faster. And the markets that all of you are going to succeed or fail in are much faster than the markets we're talking about here. GSM got started in 81, deployed in 93. Bullshit with that now in your marketplaces. We're talking about years, 1 or 2, or months. That's the difference. So things change fast, you have to recalibrate. One quick post-mortem on Iridium. In November of 2000, it was acquired for $25 million after a $5 billion investment by the former CEO of the company. They got a contract with the U.S. military for $72 million, and 1 month later, they are today, in 2006, a $200 million company. They're profitable. They work in niche markets for military disaster recovery, remote data collection. So the technology lives on, but that technology would never have been built. You couldn't afford it for the kinds of marketplaces that you're talking here. At least almost 2 orders of magnitude smaller than what they were projecting. So let's talk about what you do practically. There are these, from Digitalker, the small soap opera that I lived through, to Iridium, one played out in gigantic proportions on this huge stage. What do you do about this fundamental issue, understanding that marketplace? And I will tell you, these are my helpful hints. These are Joe's helpful hints, what I've learned over the years about figuring that out better than I did when I was in the Digitalker days. So the number one thing, and I'll talk about it in several ways here, is I describe it as, I remember I talking to Richard Newton about this one time. I describe it as my version of Sims, The Sims, or SimCity, or one of those things. I've never played that game. I've watched my kids play it a little bit. But I do that. I do a market version of SimCity. That's exactly what I do. I do Joe's Sim Market. Right? That's how I play the game of trying to figure out these marketplaces. And when I say that, that's not a casual statement I'm making to you. It's like, I had to fill in a little piece of this slide. I'm not. This is important. I spend a lot of my time thinking about, projecting, visualizing these marketplaces in my mind. And sometimes I write little pieces on paper on the computer, but in my mind, I'm creating this visualization of the future, of what it really will be like when whatever product, service, technology, whatever, is introduced in a certain way. How's that going to change things? How's that going to affect things? What's it going to look like? And when I say what's it going to look like, how's it going to affect everything? Competition. How's it going to be affected by everything? Regulatory bodies. Other players, the marketplace, economics, the international situation. Is it a U.S. or a global product? Infrastructure issues that are needed or not needed to make it happen. All of these kinds of things. Emotions. Think through the emotional state. What emotional impact will that have on the target kinds of customers? The first ones, the later ones. And you build that simulation, you build that model in your mind and keep refining and refining and refining, testing. That is a super critical piece in avoiding these kinds of mistakes. If you're doing those constant simulations, and you don't have to just do it in your head. I sit and talk with people about it too. And we work those models and we think that through and look how it's going to change. That is hypercritical if you are going to avoid some of these small or gigantic mistakes that are made in technology in targeting. So it's simulate everything, and not just technology, for God's sake. Everything. In fact, I have a rule of thumb. If I get asked a lot of times to listen to entrepreneurs and people put together business plans. And if they talk to me all about technology, thank you very much. No, I'm nice, I'm polite, I don't say nasty things to them, but it won't work. I try to give them a pointer. They got to look at that bigger picture. the overall environment and how it might change, because that's where the dynamic is really going to kick in and drive these things. The second thing, everybody should participate in this. You know, we get segmented in companies. Well, he's a marketing guy, that's a sales guy, that's a business development person, that's a finance person, that's an engineer, that's a senior engineer, that's a software engineer, that's a hardware engineer. Baloney! Baloney! Everybody needs to be simulating like this. Everybody in the company. I insist that engineers think this way. I insist. That's not a marketing job. For God's sake, the IQ, the average IQ I would posit for engineering groups in every company in the universe is higher on average than every other group in any company, on average. It's probably a true statement. Why aren't they using that brain power all the time to think about these knotty issues that you have in such companies? It's important. It's really important. Whoops. So, two key things. Simulate everybody, including all people. Finance people, too. If there's any finance people in the audience, I get upset when they don't spend time on this. You're not just supposed to count up the numbers and tell us that we're dead. You're supposed to help avoid the death. Now, I found over time, people don't completely understand me when I talk about this. So I want to give you some rules of thumb. I can get you to understand it if I spend a day or so with you, you know, what I'm talking about. Or if you work around me, you can understand what I'm really talking about, the simulation. You probably have some idea. But I have some other things that may help. So here's my first one. This happened when I was at Berkeley. So I'm in Berkeley. I was studying physics. In the laser spectroscopy lab, I had a lab partner. Neil Bergstrom was his name. And, you know, we spent a long time working on these experiments and data collection. I mean, sometimes 24 hours for several days. And, you know, you talk about a lot of stuff. And one day I happened to say, something came up, and I said, you know, I kind of like fishing. And at the time, I had hair pretty close down to my ass at that time. And so he's like, you like fishing? You know, that is strange. I would never have guessed you like fishing. I said, yeah, I kind of like fishing. I did it when I was a kid. I kind of like it. And he goes, I had no idea. He said, now that you say that, he goes, if you really are serious about fishing, I mean, now that you say it, my brother is a fisherman. And he's actually, I mean, I don't like to brag or anything, but I think he's probably one of the best fishermen in Northern California. Maybe all of California. And I'm like, really? That's a strange statement. I said, yeah, I'll see you sometime if he'll take you out. I said, well, that'd be great. And he goes, well, I'm not promising anything. He's a very strange person, and so he might not want to take you out. So he said, I'm just saying I might offer that, you know, so someday. So a few weeks later, he says, by the way, I asked my brother. He said he's willing to take you fishing. So I said, cool, you know, let's go. So a few weeks later, the date came, Saturday, we go off to go fishing at one of his spots. We go up to this river someplace in Northern California, got all our gear, go to the river. You know, it's fishing season. There's tons of people, you know, they all stake their spot on the stream. And I'm asking the people, you know, caught anything? No, nobody's caught anything. You know, I see a spot, I pick it out, and I sit there and start fishing. And Neil says, I'll see you guys later. And he disappears into the bushes. Okay. 20 minutes later, Neil comes back, and he has a stringer of 10 beautiful fish. He's the only guy on this whole stream who's caught any fish. He's got 10 fish on his stringer. And it's like, whoa, Neil, how'd you do that? And he goes, well, it's not so hard. And he goes, well, teach us. That's why we're here. So he goes, and he goes, well, I'll do it with you. So he helped us, and son of a gun, within 20 minutes, I had my 10 fish too. And here's the key thing. When I start talking to Neil doesn't talk a lot. And he's kind of, you might consider him an okie type of guy. And he said, Joe, I said, well, so what is the secret? You know, what is it that allows you to catch fish that nobody else can catch fish? And he goes, it's really simple. Joe, you got to think like a fish. It's like, I'm eyeballing this guy, and I had pegged his IQ at about that, but what exactly do you mean? And he said, listen, and he goes into this discussion. And this guy was incredible. He was incredible. Very quiet, didn't do much. His thing in life was fishing. But when he went to a stream, when he went to a place like that, he studied fish, the type of fish that you were after. And what was that story of their season? You know, what kinds of things did they eat, and what was their behavior? Were they, you know, fast water fish or not so fast water fish, cold or warm? You know, he got down. I mean, this guy, no joke, he says, you know, look, Joe, you got to figure out. He said, think about it. You're a fish. You're in there, you know, looking up. He said, pretend like that, You're in the water, you're looking out, and he said, you eat the crap that falls in on top of you, He said, got to figure out what crap is falling in right now. And so while he was in the bushes, he's digging around, he's looking for these bugs and things that are falling in right now. He said, your lure's got to look like that, because that's what they're biting at, because that's what's going in. This guy owned and loved the fish experience, right? He thought like a fish. He really did. He really did, and it was successful. Guys, that is exactly what I'm talking about these simulations. If you want to do this right in these marketplaces, that's exactly it. You've got to think like a fish. I'm not kidding. It's really key. Now, your fish are different than those fish. You play in different marketplaces. But the idea, the principle, the passion that guy showed, his investigation, deeply pushing on it, poking on it, didn't give a damn what other people thought, was into it, immersed himself in that fishdom. That's critical in your market. So the first one, think like a fish. The second one, and I insist on this, people who worked around me know this, and it sometimes becomes one of those stale mantras, but it shouldn't be because it's really important. I have a rule. For any product development that anybody does, a solid rule. You don't get to do diddly squat with it in general. There's some exceptions we'll talk about later, but you don't get to do diddly squat with it until you write the press release. Write the press release first. That's the very first thing that should happen in any product development. Write the friggin' press release first. Now, why? Now, a lot of people think I'm just eccentric about that. I am not eccentric about that. Here's why. Because the press release is as good as it gets. Or it should be, right? No, really, that's the whole idea of the press release, you shine up the turd, whatever, right? And so, it's the greatest thing, that press release, And so if your press release, which is unencumbered oftentimes by a lot of reality, is not a killer, if it doesn't knock people over in their chair, if it doesn't have the fish snapping at that bait, you've got a dud. Really. Why friggin' start the project? I'm not joking. If you can't write a good press release, doesn't get everybody, your targets, your fish going, forget it. Stop the project. It's not worth pursuing. Really. It's not. Now, there's a real truth to that at a very high level. There's a truth. So I don't let people start. That high-level truth, if you don't have that, you don't know where you're going. And now we'll get down to the second level of the truth behind that statement, which is until you can articulate very cleanly and clearly the essence of something so that it can be put out in a few sentences or a few paragraphs, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And you will probably wander lost for a long time. So it has a secondary purpose here. So another way to keep on track with your target markets, always write the press release first. I'm going to skip the next one, so if that happened to be the most important one, you're host, but it's not. They're all just helpful tips, so I'll skip it. The other ones change the rules, but I'll talk about that some other time. So let's talk about what markets are hot, because that's what we're here about. Where should you be going? What's going to be exciting and energizing right now in this space? Where should you be spending your time and energy? So I will tell you, I gave a set of speeches before I left Electronic Design Automation 1996, 1997, and the title of them was The Consumerization of Electronics. And it is something I fundamentally believe. And that force, things got kind of crazy in between, both positive crazy and negative crazy. But that fundamental force is for real. It is why I love the topic for DAC this time, because it's right on target, in my opinion, about this. And it's driven by macroeconomics. The electronics industry, the technology industry in general, has gotten big enough that the only things that really are going to shake it or move it, I call it move the needle. If you've got a $1 trillion business, well, $10 million, $50 million doesn't move the needle. Iridium 2006 doesn't move the needle. You need something bigger than that. And there really are, 90% of the interesting big things are consumer things. That's it. It's not science, rocket science. It's just obvious that the consumer markets are the ones that are going to drive things because they're the only ones big enough to make an impact, to wiggle the needle. So it is going to be a consumer kind of marketplace going forward. And you have to adjust That's where you're going to be fishy. Now, not everybody. I said 90%. 10, maybe even 20% can fiddle around in some other pond. But the big pond with most of the fish is that one. And all of that means this theme is a great one for that. Now, let's talk about consumer markets for a second. There are a few things that are super important about them. You know, what makes a great consumer product? Well, you got to have the right features at the right price point, and you got to do it in a timely fashion. It sounds really simple, right? But the consumer market is really unforgiving about that, super unforgiving, and you got to get those things really right. The first one, the right features. This is a huge problem for marketing and engineering teams all the time. This is even beyond getting enamored with technology. People get featureitis, right? They want to cram everything in, make it perfect. All of the different things, everything we've ever thought of into this product. That's not how consumer stuff works. It isn't. Consumer products and markets are generally emotionally driven. Emotionally driven. So it's what people feel. It's a passion that they have that you're inspiring in them. The thing that makes the fish jump and bite. Right? And that's not usually 16 things. I look at so many technology people who package their products, and I see these laundry lists, There's lots of buzzwords, acronyms, it's this XYZ compatible, this speed, that's, they don't give a crap about that. It's an experience, and usually in that experience, what is it? That's the thing you're looking for. What's the core experience for the consumer that really charges them up? That triggers that passion and emotion in them, that gets them going. What is it? What is the key? The set of features that support that energizing, that explosion of emotion and psychology, that's what's important. And the other stuff, usually forget it. Forget it. That's what's important. Now, there's tough things on volume price points here. You have to drive the price down so you can hit those big volumes in a consumer market, or it doesn't wiggle the needle. That's tough. That's a huge technology problem. You have to keep working at that to bring the prices down. Change your architectures, change your technology, change your manufacturing, change your sourcing to make that happen. And under the gun, you got to do it in a very timely way. I'll tell you one story, my favorite story about this. This is when the original PlayStation, so this is PlayStation 1, was being done, they outsourced the chip design, the core chip design, to LSI Logic. And so they had a team, and it was a cooperative thing, between Sony and I think there were some other partners and LSI Logic. They put together this team, and they're cranking away. And if you'll remember, now everybody's saying, oh, boo, it's obvious. But remember, PlayStation was the first game that had CD-ROM base. Everything else had been cartridge up until then. So that was a ballsy move, going to go and break the paradigm. So it was going to be CD-ROM based. They had a whole bunch of other features. And remember, too, at the time, everybody said, all of the pundits said, there's no chance for another player in the space. It's chock full. We don't need another one, right? So had a lot going against them. And they had this, that, and the other thing. So the team was working ferociously on it. They were committed. It was one of these passionate teams. And they started getting gridlock, featureitis, horrible featureitis. Adding crap, this, that, the other thing. Actually got to the point they decided, you know what? Let's do both the cartridge and the CD-ROM. That's a good idea. Horse and cow, milk and ride it, it should be great. All right. So they were going through this. Oh, it only adds a little cost to the thing, so it'll be priced out of the market, and a little time, right? But anyway, so they had a big powwow, and they brought in the big cheese, the guy from Japan who was in charge of the PlayStation project. And he's jet-lagged, fatigued, and he's sitting in the room. Doesn't say anything during the presentation of where they are. Everybody's listening, and he's like silent the whole time. People are getting scared. Is he just tired? Has he fallen asleep? Does he not care? What's going on? They finally asked it, the 2 hours of this, so what do you think? He said one word. Christmas. Everybody's like, what the hell? Christmas? And he cut through all the shit, right, with one word. Christmas! It had to be out at Christmas, and everything else followed at a reasonable price point, and they had to cut the crap. They couldn't have every feature in both CD-ROM and cartridge. It had to be there at Christmas if they were going to succeed. And it changed the whole team. They got their focus, and it's one of the great stories in electronics in terms of a success with that kind of focus, Let's talk for a second about iPod. Just for numbers' sake, perfect timing here. This is one of those that we all There's an installed base by the end of last year, about 40 million. These numbers aren't perfect accuracy. The projection this year is they'll do 30 to 40 million more. You know, some people argue how many. That's $7 or $8 billion of revenue for Apple. About where Iridium was supposed to be right now, I just want to point out. The single most successful product in these market spaces was the Sony Walkman. It sold 50 million in 10 years, the first 10 years on the market, and 309 million over its lifetime. The Apple iPod has sold 50 million, will have sold 50 million in 5 years, and they figure by 2009 it'll have gone past the 309 million of the Sony Walkman. So a phenomenal success. You know, and everybody, you know, when there's a phenomenal success, unfortunately people they gloss over some of the interesting behind-the-scenes detail. So I want to talk about some of the behind-the-scenes detail about this. First of all, Apple had huge things going for it, you know, when they started down this path. They had brand, they had image, they had marketing, they had money, they had technology, they had Steve Jobs as their CEO, you know, charismatic guy that could push things around. But they didn't go right into it, contrary to how people think these things are linear. In fact, they made a decision not to do the iPod before they made the decision to do the iPod. And the reason for it, they sized things up, and they said, you know, what business do we have being in the Walkman, in the Sony Walkman marketplace? It's a commodity consumer product. You know, Walkmen they're probably $6 now, maybe $3, I don't know. You know, so, I mean, all those guys, Sony, Panasonic, the new wave of Samsung, et cetera, they'll kick our ass. You know, we don't belong in that marketplace. You know, how can we possibly survive? Let's stay out of it. And that was the first wave decision that they made, is that, you know, we probably ought to stay out of that marketplace. But then they kept refining their model. You know, they kept simulating and thinking about things. And let's study this a little bit more. And this is why I say you've got to analyze all the factors. Because straight ahead thinking about technology and other people and what they can source and how they can do it, you can do, yeah, shit, all the other guys could do it. Yes, they had more brand power potentially, and you know, maybe they could make it look a little slicker. Their white could be whiter. I don't know. But, you know, that's not going to do it. So they started analyzing the bigger universe of this before they decided what to do. And the fundamental reason, there's one reason they won. One, and only one reason. You know, the most important reason. Rip, mix, burn. Do you remember that? That was their slogan at the beginning. It was rip, mix, burn that won the day, because people could steal billions and billions and billions of songs and play them on this wonderful device portably. It was the theft that drove it. Absolutely. No, you know, I'm not joking. It's true. It was true. And the reason that they decided to do it, they knew the other guys couldn't do it. Sony couldn't do it. Sony's hugely invested in music. Their compatriots said, you know, NFW bastards, you know, you're not going to do that. Rip us off, you jerks, you know. That's it. And everybody was constrained in the marketplace. So they looked at the market and said, it's incredible. You know, this is one of those weird circumstances where all the likely players that should kick our ass, they got their hands tied behind their back because they can't pirate shit like we can. So, and then the people who could pirate shit, they were kind of yo-yos by comparison, right? You know, they were, I think Rio was one of the yo-yos, but, you know, there was a bunch of guys that just didn't have the pizzazz and the marketing power and all that stuff to make shit happen, right? So they go, my God, this is cool. And they made a decision, let's jump in. And we ought to be in this marketplace. This is our kind of marketplace. We can charge a premium. This is like drugs. There's no one else who can do it. We can charge premium pricing for this stuff, right? But they said, this is a joke. There's no way this is a long-term marketplace, right? So we have to be prepared to get clobbered. But that's smart thinking, by the way. That was smart thinking on their part. They planned that, you know, they had done their simulations. They went, one of these other yo-yos will figure it out at some point, and they'll nail us. They'll cut our margins and screw us. Now, but these guys were smart because they keep simulating. You know, you don't stop simulating. I think you guys all know that when it comes to design, right? But sometimes we forget that when it comes to the marketplaces. Keep simulating. The world changes out there. You've got to keep changing. It changes every day. New data comes along. And so they reacted incredibly well. The rip, mix, burn worked so well, they got enormous people using enormous amounts, and they started having some power in the industry. And then remember, people started attacking them. Well, he's the biggest thief on the planet Earth. He's Mr. IP pirate, you know. He makes the Pirates of the Caribbean look sick. He's an idiot, you know. Get him, kill him, bring him in front of Congress. Yeah, this is all going on. But he realized right at that point he had leverage. He had built enough momentum. He did the jiu-jitsu move. Reese has simulated and said, let's get them to join us with iTunes. You know, we'll play this big game because they're afraid they're losing their ass. They think they're going to lose all their music and their business. We'll bring this other thing and we'll make them part of the team. And that'll give us a huge leg up on everybody else because we'll have a big jump. Smart play. Re-simulate. Look at the environment. Play your cards out that way. Now, by the way, to this day, just so everybody's clear about it, the ratio of the number of downloaded songs to stolen songs rises every day of the year. You know, so this whole notion that people are now buying music, true, they are, but they're ripping it off much faster than they're buying it. So a couple more things. A bias, this thing I say, a bias for action. One of the things that I worry about somewhat when I talk about this is that, you know, people write down all these things and it becomes this checklist, you know, okay. Did I write my press release first? You know, am I thinking like a fish? You know, did I change the rules? I don't even know what the hell rules to change because he didn't tell us what that was, right? You know. And people get constipated in action, right? And that's not the right game. That's not the right way to play. You have to have a bias to do stuff, to get out there and make things happen. You really do. You got to move forward. I had a guy who used to work for me. I love this phrase he had, postpone perfection. He used to go crazy with this. He said, stop with this postpone perfection. Go do it. Take a risk. There's nothing wrong, by the way. And everything I said, I want to be very, very clear about it. There's nothing wrong with taking a risk. There's nothing wrong with being wrong sometimes. You know, there isn't. Now, what is wrong is to stay committed to something that's stupid and wrong. That's what's wrong. Do not reevaluate on a regular basis. Do not resimulate and rethink. That's wrong. That's stupid. But not making mistakes. You've got to get out there on the skinny branches, and stuff happens. Sometimes you cannot. You know, no matter how well you simulate it in your mind, in group simulations, whatever you do, you can't do it all. There are limitations, honestly, to making that happen. So you're going to make mistakes. And the key in making mistakes, I'll give you my number one piece of investment advice, and this works whether you're personal investments, whether you're investing in a project in a company, or with a partner, or whatever you're doing, any kind of investment. You start down that path, you make your investment. The question you have to ask yourself, think about your own stocks. You know, I know some people right now, there's somebody who has a nervous stomach. I probably just ruined the whole talk for them. Think about my stock. Oh, God, Jesus. Bastard. How was I to know that they were having an option dating problem? So, anyway, get over that and listen to this for a second, right? When you think about your investment, your personal investments, etc., here's the way you should take your investment. Would you make that investment today? Would you? It's a simple question. Would you make that investment today? And whether it's a project or your own personal investment or something you're working on, working with somebody else, what people do is they tend to take the weight and the momentum and the inertial force of what's gone from the past, and they kind of keep with it. That's what happened at Iridium. Wow, I did all that work. In whatever, 8 years, you know, miracles had happened. We can't, you know, we must soldier on. We must soldier on. No, but a simple question. Would you do it today? Would you really, with GSM, 150 million users, 23 countries, 25 coming, would you really make that investment right now? Would you sign up for $5 billion right now in that marketplace? I don't think so. I think if they'd asked that question, they would have gotten, hell no, right? Hell no. And there's nothing wrong with that. Kill this stuff. It's okay to make a mistake. Kill it dead and clean and fast. You know, do those reevaluations, then get out. The second thing about this, which is generally, it's a second piece of that, a corollary to that. In companies, in any enterprise, feed the winners, starve the losers. You know, people tend to nurse the losers forever and ever and ever, you know. They feel bad about it. They feel bad about the team. They feel bad. They're embarrassed and this and that. No! Then you get, it's like barnacles growing on the bottom of a ship, you know? Pretty soon you have a whole ocean liner of barnacles under there, right? And the rest, the healthy people, can't move forward. That's crap. That slows down and messes up companies. You've got to make the cut, get rid of them, get rid of the barnacles, and move on. Super important. So I was going to tell you what I've been up to, but we don't have any time, so I'm not. And so on the what I've been up to, I will, for those who want, we do have a booth, right? So we have a booth, 4020, 4020. It's a booth for Orb Networks. This is one of the many things that I've been up to. If you remember, I left, the short version, I left EDA to go into education. And the first thing didn't work out, but a couple years later, I actually did start something in education. And I did it for one reason, this man here, who's sitting in the front row, who happens to be Ellen's husband. Another connection. Anyway, I met him randomly. It had nothing to do with Ellen. It was random from another thing. I met him when he was working at SRI, and we were talking about educational things. And over the period of time, we ended up doing a project together, and it was so phenomenal, the work that was done by him and his team, and so outrageous. I said, we must do more. And so we ended up starting this educational incubator together, which is called Bravo Brava. Since that time, we have spun off 3 companies, the third of which, 2 are in core education. The first one was for helping children learn how to read more efficiently. We got, in the United States, there's about 250,000 kids using this software now to learn to read more rapidly and with greater reliability, so that they really do learn. A second one is for English as a second language, and the third one was Orb Networks. In a nutshell, I will tell you, and I won't do the demo and all that, because you can go to 4020 or www.orbnetworks, right? Or just orb.com, whatever you like, and check it out for yourself. Orb was the brainchild of Luke, and we were actually, when he created this, I had asked him to investigate interactive television as a potential learning media. And he came back to report to me that interactive TV was a hopelessly messed up architecture that would never work, and that we ought to stay away from it like the plague. It would be like a La Brea tar picks and drag us down with time and money. I said, great, let's stay away. But out of that investigation, no, that's not the right place to go, he had an insight into the future of where digital media, the whole landscape, not just interactive TV, but where all of what we now call digital media would go. And he had put together this beautiful architecture that we spent a couple years working on, tuning, playing with, and then last year built this company based on it. Go check it out. It allows you, in its essence, in its simplest form, allows you to, as it says here, I think I'll just skip ahead here. It's called MyCast. It allows you to, essentially, turns broadcasting upside down. So instead of having to sit back and take whatever slop you're given on all 1,000 channels that you pay for, as they have it, their time, their place, their content, you become the broadcaster, or in this case, MyCaster. You build your own channels, you build your own network of any of your digital media content, whether it's photos, whether it's videos, whether it's television, music, anything. I never had an iPod, don't need an iPod. I have all 6,000 of my songs available at any time because my home computer becomes a little personal broadcasting system that transmits all of that information to me wherever, whenever I am, taking care of all the baloney about formats and transmission rates and this and that, so that I can just click on my mobile phone, on my personal computer, anywhere there's a web connection, I get access. Go check it out. It's free, so you can play with it yourself, and with this group, you probably will. So my last thing was going to talk about a little bit about EDA, but in the interest of time, I'll conclude. We can spill over, okay? So by the way, feel free. If people have to go and do other things, you can feel free to leave and go do your other stuff, no problem. And we'll continue here. Let me talk about EDA for a second to give you a flavor for it. Actually, before I do that, I want to say one thing about Raphael here. So he's an Orb employee. And this goes to some of the things that we've been talking about here. So Raphael thought like a fish, right? He's an engineer. He's in part of Luke's engineering team. And his thing was working on some aspect of music. And he was had a personal passion around Winamp as his environment and what he uses for delivering his music. And he saw a way to improve the Winamp environment with the Orb technology. And he kind of raised his hand a couple of times and said, how about it? And some of the marketing people said, meh, meh. So he said, okay, on his own, he went off himself and built a little prototype of this whole thing. And everybody looked at it and said, wow. And when it was there and when we could actually see it, everyone went, wow, that's pretty cool. Let's try it. And on this guy's own personal initiative, it was the single, we make kinds of widgets that work in different areas. This was the single most successful one. 30 days, 30,000 people signed up for this widget. The most successful one. We have 300,000 users today. He got 30,000 in 30 days with this idea he had. And that's when I say I'm deadly serious about it, that everybody can participate in this game of envisioning the future and thinking like that fish and figuring out how it would be and how does that end market. He knew that marketplace himself. He was more of that kind of fish, and he was able to make that kind of thing happen. So, EDA opportunities. Now, here's a perfect one, so I will give you the caveat. I haven't been in EDA. I said at the front of this whole thing, I haven't been in EDA for 10 years. I haven't been with the customers. I don't know the technology. I don't know what's going on. And so I would never supposed to tell you what the right answers are from that, because I haven't been thinking with those fishies, in the last few years. So I can't give you a good read on that from an EDA, inside design, etc. perspective. I can give you observations from where I have been sitting over the last few years, which is I've seen a bunch of investor guys at it. I've seen other things going on in the enterprise software marketplace, and I see big trends. And I will tell you from those experiences things that I would point to, and I would say, hey, if I was over there, I'd be thinking about these things. So my first observation, one thing I do not like at all, that really irritates me and it's got to get solved somehow, is when I listen, because unfortunately, I have spent too much time begging for money for companies that I've been involved with over the last 10 years. And so I spent a lot of time with VCs and investors. And one of the things I hate when they talk about EDA is it's dead from their point of view, in general, It's a dead space. They're not interested in investing. I said, well, why not? Well, because there can't be another Cadence or Synopsys or Mentor or Magma. None of those big things can happen again, ever. That's it. The market is closed. Ooh, that's an ugly, it's like, ooh, that's an ugly dynamic. If you really believe that, and so the only thing they'll invest in are companies that will get acquired by one of those bigger guys. So I don't want to build anything great because that can't happen anymore. I want to build things that are bite-sized pieces that these people will chomp up. I'm going to build fish, bait for fish, right? That's their thing. And so that, that somehow seems like it has been smothering to some degree this industry. And I don't like that. It doesn't feel right. So then, that's an observation. I'll come back to maybe something that could be done about it. The second observation, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, and it's always good to say, are any of those trends, the things that are going on in the world, are any of those, would they be useful in any way, shape, or form in the EDA industry? So, look, I'll take some trends. Look at all the stuff going on in the net right now. So you get these wild, viral kinds of schemes that are going on. You get portals. You've got, all these different kind of advertising. Give the stuff away for you and use advertising to support it. All kinds of stuff like that going on. You know what I'm talking about in that space. Is there anything there that would make any sense for EDA? And I look at it and I go, it's not the right dynamic. There aren't the right numbers of people. It's not the right dynamic. None of those things feel right in this space for any kind of significant play. Maybe there's a tiny thing you could do, but nothing big and significant that way. So then there's another big thing that's going on. Enterprise software in general, and I would say if you are out of this world of software, you would look at it and say, well, this is another enterprise software thing. Just happens you're selling to engineering enterprises. Enterprise software is going through hell everywhere, so actually, it's not so bad. When you look at the numbers in EDA, it's been growing. It's been staying its own. It's been growing. It's not so bad when you compare it to a lot of enterprise software segments that are really messed up. But in the enterprise software segment, a very interesting phenomenon, the biggest, hottest thing going on right now is a potential wave is open source. So people are talking about going open source with technologies. And, every single enterprise software package you can think of, people are doing an open source thing for today. So you go, does that make any sense? Does something like that make any sense for electronic design automation? My answer to that is no, because if you go study all the dynamics around open source projects in ERP, you have to have millions of users, millions and millions of potential users to make them work economically. So it doesn't feel right. I know people will propose it and talk about it and yammer about it, but I don't see how that's going to work out specifically here. Now, there's a separate piece that's interesting about that, which is an important one, very important one. The reason open source works, open source is not free. You know, everybody thinks, I mean, there are free versions, but open source in general is not free. The key to open source, all these companies that are getting started, there's one thing that they do. They are reducing the cost of selling. That's the number one thing. If you look at enterprise software, the cost of selling is typically between 35 and 45% of the gross revenues. Huge expenditures, percentage-wise, on selling. And the whole idea behind open source is somehow cut that out. You know, drop that out so that the customer saves that money and amortize it over a broader group of people. That's the idea behind it. So there is something interesting and potentially right there. As an example, they've done this study in enterprise software area after enterprise software area, and you find that you make no money on selling new licenses in a mature industry. None. Zero. The cost of selling equals the cost of what the revenue you get for it. All the money's made on maintenance. Right? So that doesn't feel right either. So what do we do different? What are some of the things that could be done different? I will throw this out as an idea. With this investment problem you've got, with this enterprise software thing and the cost of selling. By the way, in other places, here's the thing. As you know, I spent a lot of time selling in this industry, and I had great sales teams working for me, and I loved these guys. But on the flip side, is it right? Is it the right thing to spend 40% of revenues on that? Is that really it? If you went into, this is what they say in other ERP areas, if you went into a car dealership, and the guy said, you can get your car off the web, or at a 40% discount, or have me to help you in this buying process, what would people do, right? They're going to take it off the web. Now, it's not as simple in our space because it's more complicated, but there's something fundamentally at issue there. Now, I'll put these together. The other thing that bothers me, and this is about startup kinds of things, I think if you look at the investment, there's an equal investment made in most EDA companies in building the sales and marketing channel as there is in the engineering and technology. An equal investment in the sales and marketing as there is in the technology. And there's something wrong about that. And what's wrong about that to me fundamentally on a global scale is there's no value added being provided in those sales channels. It's the same sales channel being built over and over and over again, the same way with not much addition to it. And that's bad. Somehow that's got to get solved. Now, one of my thoughts about how that gets solved, and it goes along with this investment, is a better situation would be if the larger players in the industry were better at accommodating new software technologies that were coming out of small companies. So they didn't have to build those channels. So they, in fact, did become the channels for these technologies and these capabilities. And they found a way of splitting the money. That you don't build an economic model that forces you to have such a high price point and build that big, expensive channel. Find a way to go through the big guys. But our environment today isn't set up very much that way. And by the way, one of the problems, I've been through it myself on the flip side of that, is that, people say the economics can't work. That's if you do it in a traditional fashion. And if the big guys don't accept their role as being an integrator and a solution supplier and adding value that way, and if customers don't accept that as some of the value added that they do. Okay, last thing. The other thing I'd look for, if you look at what really drove the thing that all the people, the investors who loved, the VCs who loved EDA, they all invested during the time, the heady days when the growth was phenomenal. And there were two big things going on at that time. There were the hardware changes where people were getting very low-cost hardware that could run all these applications. And at the same time, you were getting independent groups of software guys replacing all the internal design automation teams and groups. And those two factors led to this enormous growth in revenue. Now, if you look at it, the thing that limits the growth of the EDA is basically the growth of the electronic design marketplace, the electronics marketplace itself. So it should grow approximately at that level unless something changes, something dramatic changes, or you do something different. So my thought about it, I would look to other spaces nearby. This is the kind of thing that usually works or is an opportunity to see if there's something that can work. And so when I look at spaces nearby, if you want to see one of those things that will create some growth again, the two that would seem obvious to me would be manufacturing. And I know there's a lot of stuff afoot right now in the industry on that side. But I think there's great opportunities potentially there of melding the two, the manufacturing and the design side, and maybe creating another burst of innovation and revenue opportunities. And the other one is software. It's on the absolute flip side. On the flip side, what people are delivering are complete solutions, software and hardware, commingled. And so doing more on that side. Those are the two tangential areas that seem like they might be available for explosive growth. So, last comment, where do we go from here? One of the things I will tell you, in working with a lot of these small companies, or being the latest one, the opportunities in the technology space, everybody got very depressed. They got overly excited in the 99 and 2000, and then got overly depressed in 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, right? It's like, oh, woe is me, it's never going to be the same. Well, of course it's never going to be the same, right? That was then, and this is now. But the question is, what's hot now? What's interesting now? What are the fish doing today? How has the environment changed? What can we do? Is there any less opportunity today for technology than there was 10 years ago and 20 years ago? Baloney! It's bigger than it ever was before. And I'll tell you the reason why it's bigger than it ever was before, because there's so much infrastructure and groundwork that has been laid in technology. There's so much heavy lifting has been done in terms of foundation capabilities, in hardware, in networking, in software capabilities. So you have this wonderful foundation on which to build that we now can touch. Technology has touched. My God, there are, I forget this year, 1 billion handsets, I think it is. They're going to be sold. 1 billion cell phone handsets that are little tiny computers in your hand around the world. Technology is touching more people than ever before. The market size and opportunity is much bigger than it was 10 years ago. Much, much bigger than it was 10 years ago. So the opportunities are phenomenal and getting bigger. Yeah, they're different. You can't run the same old play that you did before. You can't build Cadence or Synopsys or any other company the same way you did 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. It's going to be different. But the opportunities are bigger, and they're more available than ever before. Now, the last thing I will say about that, one of the things, and the reason I gave this talk, it goes right back to the start, my experience way long time ago. I can't even remember when that, 80, I guess it was, 1980 with Joe Santos. Product teams, and I focused here on engineering because I think sometimes engineers don't get the credit, the due, the limelight that they deserve oftentimes in these projects. But product teams in general, and that includes marketing guys and development people, everybody, you heard from what I was saying before, I think everybody's got to play. Product teams and engineering teams, when they're great, they do put everything into it. They put their life, they put their soul into these things. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to invest that much of yourself in this, and there are these tremendous opportunities out there, really, it's an opportunity-rich landscape that we're headed into, much more opportunity than before. If you're going to do that, for God's sake, make sure you're doing it on something worthwhile. Now, that doesn't mean, as I said, to become so frozen, oh, am I making the right choice? No. Of course, you're going to take some risks. Of course, you're going to make some mistakes. You got to get out there and play. But be smart. Use a few of these hints and tips, the things that have worked for me, to check yourself. Are you on the right track? And speak up. Just because you're an engineer or the junior marketing guy doesn't mean you don't have a brain and you can't think through and simulate and look at all this stuff. You can. And speak up like Raphael did, or Luke did before about architecture. Speak up, and you will and can make a difference. And there are huge opportunities that I'm sure you will be able to achieve and realize over the coming years. That's it.